The indie game scene is thriving more than ever as developers continue to innovate and create in all new ways, forming new genres and terraforming the gaming landscape. Players too look forward to these games as we gravitate toward more personal experiences crafted by small and dedicated teams who get to have their hands on each part of the process, causing these games to feel more connected and genuine. But how did we get here? To a place where indie games rival and often outsell some of the biggest AAA releases. How did indie games become such a fixture, and what games contributed most to this rise? Today, let's look at the indie games that changed everything. The lineage of indie games began in the early 2000s with games like Cave Story, Shantae, and Endless Forest all establishing the core structures from which indie games would be built on in the future. But when discussing the modern era of indies, there are 4 games which I believe laid the groundwork for what was to come. Minecraft, Terraria, Super Meat Boy, and Hotline Miami are all vastly different in almost every discernible fashion, but each garnered huge followings and proved that you didn't have to have a massive studio to make something fun and innovative. Super Meat Boy sought to refine and lengthen the Flash games that had inspired it, to create a video game from the micro games that people had been loving on the internet. It pulled in both its own audience from Flash websites and a big portion of the Mario audience, which had been left out to dry with the lack of good 2D Mario games. On the other side of the spectrum, Minecraft and also Terraria were doing something completely special as they crafted Lego-like experiences for a bunch of kids who grew up on Legos, setting them free in an infinite world to build whatever they wanted or to survive however they could. Obviously, Minecraft is far different now, but in those early days, it established the power and the creativity that indie games could hold. During this time, Hotline Miami also came out and sought to pick the player's brain as it forced them to look deeper into the things that they were consuming, to investigate the violence which many AAA games were built upon. While all 4 of these games had very little similarities, they all set indie games down a path to where we are today. They pulled in players from all facets and walks and turned their attention to the indie games to come. While all 4 of these games were instrumental in creating a base for indie games to thrive, it wasn't until the next 3 that the idea of indies started to become a fixture within video game discussions. Journey, Rocket League, and Undertale represent mainstreamification, as they were user-friendly experiences that brought to light a creation space that was still being overlooked even though it was thriving. Journey took influences from Endless Forest and Shadow of the Colossus to create something so unspeakably gorgeous. It was proof that a video game could be a piece of art and firmly planted indie games as the best place to find such art. Rocket League formed an out-of-the-box sport and created an online experience where players could compete in one of the most unique and competitive spaces ever crafted by a video game. Its frantic action helped bolster the idea that new and creative experiences could also be esports. And finally, Undertale played a huge role in building the narrative humor that takes hold of so many indie games released of recent, bolstering a beautiful story to boot, all while harkening back to a retro era of games just like Shovel Knight had done the year before. While indies had been in the mainstream, these games all made it possible for them to thrive. They had a massive impact on how indies would be viewed in the future. By pushing forward their art, competition, and humor, they showed all the things that indie games could do far better than their AAA counterparts, meaning that players would start to look in their direction when seeking something more than just the status quo. We have now entered a phase where indies aren't just considered great games, some are considered the greatest games of all time. Hollow Knight, Celeste, and Hades represent the perfection of indie games, the refining of the formula, and the excellence that happens when developers stretch their farthest. Because of the base laid out by the games previously discussed, these games have competed for and won Game of the Year awards, which had previously been a rarity. Hollow Knight is the perfect Metroidvania, with outstanding style, atmosphere, and gameplay, which all pull the player into its world. It garnered a cult following of players who have become mesmerized by its quality, many arguing that it topples all the Metroidvanias that inspired it. We also have Celeste, which combined the fast-paced, tight movement of a game like Super Meat Boy with the emotional and excellently crafted story of a game like, well, nothing else. Celeste was a trailblazer in so many ways, but its heartfelt and relatable story is what made it a Game of the Year contender. The last game is Hades, which refined and simplified the roguelike genre, bringing it to an audience of less sweaty gamers. Add to this the intriguing story based around the Greek myths and tight gameplay that forces you to master intricate builds, and you have a one-of-a-kind game which many hold dear. All of these games were released during the indie renaissance and had to compete with hordes of others, but still shone bright above their counterparts, jousting and sometimes winning against the giants themselves. There are a lot of amazing indie games that contributed to getting us to where we are now, and in my opinion, these are the most instrumental. But thousands of others created building blocks for all the games we play today. I would have loved to talk about so many of my favorites, but I like to keep these videos short. Indie games mean so much to me. They are why I created this channel, and a big reason as to why I still play games today. I love talking about them, I love playing them, and I love knowing that they're made by passionate developers. The indie game scene is one made up entirely of passion, and getting to experience all that hard work is what makes indie games so important.